Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Talking Over Making Comics. This episode is script to page, where I'm going to take the script and turn it into a complete comic book page. So what we're looking at here is a page out of my upcoming comic book that I'm working on called White Cell Re-Evolution. This is page 68. It's going to be a 6-panel page, and I just wanted to start off with the first couple to look at here so you guys know where I'm going with it. The first panel looks like it says showing Mr. Tanner accepting a cup of tea from a saucer held by the old lady. So I want to show you how I go about creating a panel. And essentially what I do is I kind of envision each panel as a scene in a movie. That's the first thing I do. And I'll kind of give it a quick mental like run through of how I would see it maybe in a film or something like that. And then I'll sort of decide what panel shape would best work for that kind of scene. Now, I like to usually work in wide panels. It's just the way I like to do it. It's very cinematic, I think. Wide shots, I just prefer. Now, you can't like just stick with one type of shot, and I know that, but it's my go-to for setting the scene or really creating dramatic effects, I think. So I got my character, I got my scene, I got like the prop. He's gonna have to hold a cup of tea, and it's most of the work's going on inside your head at this point, and now it's time to get it down on paper. So I'm gonna start the roughs here, and we'll just go from there. All right, so I just kind of dive in here at this point when you're starting the page clean. I usually go with kind of the first thing that sticks out in my mind, which is usually like the face or a head, and I'll frame out the body, the direction that I want, the character to look. Now, when you're telling the page or the story across the whole page, there's a rule that I learned, and I think I mentioned this before, but it's kind of like if you're watching a play or something, you see the play from the front. A lot of people, maybe in some situations, people might be kind of around the sides of the stage, but you never see from behind the stage. And when you're telling a story and it's within one scene, I get it's best to not do like a 360-degree around the scene. It's best to kind of look at it as if the cameras are in front of the stage and you're showing things. So when you're putting all the characters, you got to make sure that they're coordinated in a way where they remain the same places in relation to each other, and that just helps to make sure that the story is fluid and so that the reader can follow what's going on and they don't get lost in the setting. So the one time you can like change it up though, you can do transitions and you can move the camera around and all that, and that's fine. But as a general rule, it's good to kind of keep the camera looking at the stage. So when I'm creating this page, I'm thinking of those kinds of things. And it's important to remember that you're creating a scene and you're creating a space. So you got to move through that space as you tell the story. Also, something I should mention is that since I'm the one that is writing my books, I often will take liberties while I'm working through the story, and there are times where I might deviate a bit from how I wrote the script because as I'm drawing it, maybe the scene just feels different, or things could work that wouldn't necessarily work, the way I wrote it down. And so in this instance, I've actually on page 67, it would be, I had already established the shot where the older lady was bringing in the teacup. So this is carrying on, and this is making changes as I go that I feel like works better for the story. Yeah, I remember I read a book called Understanding Comics, written by Scott McCloud, a really popular book, really great author. I highly recommend all of his books because he kind of gives you insight as to like how people when they're reading comics, what they're thinking, how people absorb them, comprehend them. Like it's a totally different way of telling a story, and it also you take it in a different way. One of the things that stuck with me is how important it is to make sure that every time you're setting up a panel and you're drawing, you want to showcase what's important and try to stay away from anything that is unnecessary or um, that would dampen the effect that you're trying to create in each panel. Because people, they want to have the story move along when they're reading. They don't want to get hung up, and it's important to kind of keep that flow going by making sure that you're always presenting the important information in each panel. So I'm wrapping up with the first panel here. We're going to take a look at the second panel, which shows the main character, Agent Axis, and he is going to be, he's just going to be like he's talking. It's a simple panel. It's just to carry the scene along, and I don't have to get too fancy with panels like these. These are sometimes they're a nice break because it's basically just a conversational shot, and I try to do as much as I can with it instead of just doing like a head on. I'll try to like crop a face in or zoom in really close. I think here, yeah, I just go in with. I want to make sure I leave enough space for the word bubble. There's not a lot of text here, and so I want to frame out the page too, and because honestly, every time I do a page, I'm always conscious of like how the page is going to look like as a whole. You want to keep that in mind too. And sometimes it's easy to forget when you're going from panel to panel to panel and you're just trying to show the scenes. I like the page when it's finished to almost look like there's a little bit of a design element going into how the page looks. I guess it's like composition of the overall page. That's something that I try to stay conscious of when I work. So because of that, I want to frame in this side of the page. So that's why I chose this angle here. And again, when it's just a simple panel, you know, just get the job done for what it needs. And right now, I just need it to where he's going to be talking. I should probably elaborate a little bit about how I figure out how to do all the panels on the page. And as a general rule, I usually try to stick around 5 panels per page. I find that's a good number because you can get enough of the story done. I try to get as much story as I can on each page. I don't like to skimp out. So looking at the next panel, the third one here, he's going to be taking a sip of his tea, and he's going to be into more deep conversation here. And figuring them out, like I got it in my head about roughly how I want to approach each page I do. If there's a splash page, or if it's sometimes you do like a quick sequence page where there's smaller panels and there are a lot of them. So going in on this one here, I kind of knew it's just more of a very casual, relaxed, talking heads style page. And with that, I kind of just let I guess just kind of the flow of the page and how I do it. I just kind of let it go as I go. I don't rough out the panels all at once, and I know a lot of guys do that, and that works too. You can thumbnail how you want to do each thing, but the problem is I feel like for me personally, it's very restraining or restricting because I kind of feel like I'm forced into uh, each panel before I even start drawing. And I don't like that. I like to be able to kind of be loose and say, you know what, I got the space here. I can shoot the scene this way. And that's my approach on it. And so knowing that there's going to be 5 panels, I know the amount of space I can take up. I know which panel I want to be the largest, smallest. For instance, when I went in here with the shot and axis, I knew it was small text balloon. It was a small segment, so make the box small. So when I want to create dramatic effects, I usually maybe will go in with a little bit bigger of a scene. And another thing that comes out of that book, Understanding Comics, that I really, really dug was he talks about how the size of a panel can dictate time in the story. or how you put the panels together in relation to one another can also determine how fast things are happening in the scene, which is very interesting. So a large box panel like I did here with panel 3, that's going to kind of be, it's going to slow time down a bit. If the smaller the panel, I think it's faster. So if you put a bunch of panels that are small in sequence, sometimes I do that with fight scenes or action scenes, especially fast-paced action scenes. You put a lot of small panels together with little snippets of action. It's going to be read as really quick moments in time. And so you have to think about that too. So in this long, drawn-out conversation that these characters are having, here I'm about to rough out uh, panel 4. Yeah, introducing another character. His name is Quinn into the scene. But if you're trying to create dramatic, like lengthy discussions, sometimes you can use the big shots, and it'll kind of show that time is slowed down a bit. And that's what I try to do when I'm creating the panels, when I'm choosing the panels. So a lot of it is kind of instinctual when it comes to storytelling. You're a little bit of a director, a little bit of a producer, writer, all those things when you're making these pages. So that's kind of how I look at it. Is I got to decide, how time passes in the scene. So yeah, here we're gonna be putting in Quinn, and in the story, he is the leader of the resistance group that the Nexus team, which Axis is a part of, Agent Axis, the main character. He joins up with this resistance group called Geneva's Echo, and he's a cool character. He's a new addition. Like this book that I'm working on, this page comes from a book that's a sequel to the first book I ever made, called White Cell Inoculation. So it's really interesting when you're making comics and you have your characters that you create from scratch, and you're writing them up, you're figuring out their personalities and all that, and then you finish some works with them in it, and then as time goes on, you really start to like build this character in your mind, and you start to really connect with them. And it's such a cool part of making comics that I've just now discovering, because I'm still early into creating comics. I started in 2015, but now these characters are becoming just as real as Batman, Superman, or any of the big name characters. They become that real to me. So that really helps if you really enjoy your characters when making comics. I look forward to putting these guys in scenes and having them interact. And then especially when you have the final product done and you go back and you have all the text in place and you read through it and everything comes together, it's such a cool uh, it's such a cool thing to experience your creation. And I gotta tell you, I mean, all you guys that want to make comic books, you got to see it through to the end. You got to see it come together and then check it out. If you haven't done it, you got to check it out. For everyone that has done it, it's a lot of work, but it's awesome, right? It makes it all worth it when it comes together and you bring characters to life. So yeah, let me talk for a second about kind of the process of where we're at with all this. This is the rough stage, working into prepping for the line work. And this video, like I said, it's going to be in two parts. Because it's such a long kind of thing. And this is the part where you really work out all the kinks and you get the foundation for your final artwork. So I make sure that, I find that the more effort you put into kind of getting the roughs done, the better it all feels. And I mean, the better it works out, because there's been times where maybe I threw some roughs down and I'm like, I'll figure this out in the line work stage. And sometimes that can work. Sometimes I can do that if it's one of your strengths. But there's been times where I thought, what, I'll just wing it in the line work, and then you just stumble through it and all that, because you really need that opportunity when drawing comics to be loose. You need that opportunity to express that kind of organic art style, because the way people move in real life and the way that bodies interact and move around, there's so many like small little details that we don't always pick up if we're just starting from like the clean line work. So by going with like a very loose rough and you kind of, it's like a sketch, like a sketchbook, you just kind of sketch it out. That's when you start revealing things you might not otherwise had put in there. So really like letting go and having fun on the roughs and really trying to make the expressions work, it always pays off in the line art stage. All right, so now we are moving on to panel 5. We're going back to Mr. Tanner, and he's got that smug look on his face. Mr. Tanner, I won't really spoil too much who he is in the story, but he's an interesting character, and he's going to be kind of like a big part of the sequel to White Cell. And he's been really fun to draw. And that's the thing. I mean, when you're creating the characters, um, know that you're going to be drawing them a lot, and know that you're going to you're going to have to um, see them often. So like make them interesting. I mean that probably goes without saying, but at the same time, I always think now, what's going to work drawing wise. What's going to make it enjoyable to draw. And I find that I really like drawing older men's faces. All the little details and the creases and crevices are so much fun. You can get away with being very like expressive with the faces, all the folds in like the saggy droopy eyes and things like that. I just really like doing it. I like drawing those older men, the expressive faces. Man, that sounds weird. But I do, yeah. So drawing Mr. Tanner here, I dig it. It's fun. Now I've said before that when I approach a page, I always try to do something different or try to challenge myself at least in one of the scenes or one of the panels. And coming up, and I think on this last panel here, it's panel 6. I go with like an angled shot that I wouldn't normally go with, I guess, because it's a bit challenging. You're looking at like, I think this is a lower angled shot of the face, and so I for a long time I've tried to train myself to draw without using reference. Reference is so important though. I mean, you got to use it. But as an artist, and when you're dealing with time management and you're dealing with trying to evolve, I often try to give it a go without using reference. And so this is where it gets like kind of like the game is on kind of thing. And I'll practice and this rough stage is why it's so important here, because this is where you're like molding the clay and you're just trying to get it to look the way you want it, the way you see it in your mind. And so with a low angle shot, I felt like it's gonna tell this part of the scene the best way, in my opinion. You go with what you think is going to be the most impactful. And I really wanted to create kind of a dramatic angle here. And so breaking up the face in all of the different zones and trying to like get the angles right, that was the challenge for me on this page. And I think, I thought to myself, if I can get this, that'll really like, put this page over the edge. Since it's such a simplistic page, why not throw in something that's a little bit different? So I broke panel here, which I do often. I know a lot of artists and creators aren't crazy about it, and then there's a lot of people that go nuts with it. I like using them. I like to kind of create different space, have the reader's eyes as they're reading the story. It kind of like, to me, it pops out when it happens, and as long as you're using it the right way, you don't overdo it, I think it's good stuff. So you could see here that I'm just trying to like work out the model and trying to make the angle effective. And I know that for me personally, I got to get practicing on the way that the eye is shaped inside the head from a low angle, because you're dealing with cheekbones and all that sort of thing. So, okay, I think right now I'm getting ready to set up for the line works. And for this video, we're going to get to the finished line work. So we'll have a nice complete illustration. In the next video, I'll show taking the line work into final inking and rendering stage. So here at this stage, this is what I always do. I'll lower the opacity of the sketch layer, I'll lock it, and then I'll create a layer for panels. Sometimes panels overlap, and that's what's happening here. Is I'm going to make a couple layers and then break up the panels um, so that they cut in the right way. And this is an exciting part of the process for me, because this is when I'm going to, get those final lines down. And so to me, this is where the page really like begins forming into a complete page. So I talk a lot about like the different phases or stages when making comics, because I really want to emphasize that, having kind of like a routine or like a workflow as you're making your pages from script to final, it really kind of helps you produce pages consistently, and it kind of keeps you moving forward. I know that when I was first starting out, I was kind of like just kind of floundering in the water trying to figure out how to approach it. And there's a lot of different books and information out there, but I found that trying to developing my own approach was what really worked for me. So, and also I'm working digital, so I had to kind of do things a little bit different, because there's no scanning involved. There's a lot of times, if you're working traditionally, you start with the roughs and then you go into pencils, and then you take the pencils and then you do inks on those. And I kind of skip that, because using digital, you're free to kind of use the layers and make adjustments so easily. And so I go from the roughs just to final line work. And for me, that's great, because I mean, it speeds the process along. And when making comics, um, time management is really important. You want to be able to good work at a reasonable pace, because people, I mean, if you know the industry, you know that it's about producing, you know, um, work quickly, because there's usually deadlines that you have to make, and there's a lot of artwork that goes into comic books. You're talking 22 pages roughly each individual issue. And so to stay on top of it, you got to have a system down in place so that you can count on that and you know where you're going. And so kind of establishing steps, no matter what they are for you, but establishing some sort of steps is what's going to keep you on track. It's going to keep all of your pages consistent. And so that's what I developed for myself, my own steps, which is starting from script into roughs, and you rough the whole page out and get that foundation down. And then I move on to doing the line art, which I'm doing here now. And once the line art's complete, then I go into what I call, it's like kind of like the inking rendering stage, where that's when I put in all the blacks. That's when I put in, shadow effects. And then the final step that I use, that it's kind of part of like my approach and style and all that, is it's like a lighting treatment that I usually put in. This book is all grayscale, black and white, kind of monochromatic. And I use like a white light treatment that I use to kind of create like a mood for the style of my book. And so kind of having that like regiment down is what allows you to keep producing effectively, I think. It also gives you a good idea of how long it takes to complete a page. I've had people ask me how long it takes to do my pages. I find that it's like roughly about like 2 to maybe like 3 hours per page, depending upon the level of detail. I know this page isn't too detail heavy. It's a talking heads kind of page, like I said. So this one, it didn't take too long. I think this one's like roughly like 2 hours. And everybody works at their own pace. I know a lot of guys, especially if you're working traditional, it can take a really long time to do a page, and that's fine, because working with ink and brush and all that's very intensive, so all that stuff takes time. But setting your own goals is a, I think, important part of it too. I know that for me, like, I try to get a 22 page done each month. If I get more done than that, that's great. But I don't let myself slip too far from that. So if I get 22 pages of art done in a month, I'm happy about that. I also I do the lettering too, so that's part of it. And you know ultimately, if I can get a complete book done in a month, that's my goal. And that's not too different from the industry. I think inkers and pencilists, or I'm sorry, pencilers, they usually try to get at least a book done a month. And I think that, as a comic book creator, um, it's not a bad goal to strive for. I think that's a reasonable amount of work to get done, as long as you have the time. I think there's, when you're talking about people that want to make comic books, it usually falls into two types of people, and it's the people that they really they really enjoy it and they love it and they try to fit it in, and it can be very challenging because making comics is not easy, and it takes a lot of time and effort, and emotionally and mentally it's exhausting to produce an entire comic, no matter who you are, I think. So the two people, I mean, you got people that do it full time, and you got people that are trying to make it happen in between their regular life, their family and their work and all that. So I'll tell you, for me personally, I do this full time. This is me 5 days a week. Usually on Tuesdays, I do these videos or I'll do some training. But definitely 4 days out of the week, I try to get 2 pages done a day, and that's my goal. And it takes me between about 5 to 6 hours to do it. For 2 pages. And by after that though, I'm done. I'm spent on drawing. And there's times where I wish I could do like maybe some more, do some like pinups, or I also do. I try to make little advertisements and things like that for all my projects. Any of us self-publishers know what that's like. You gotta try to push your books too. So it's a lot of work. But for those of you that I think are trying to do it in between the day job or whatever, it is challenging. It's challenging to stay on track because the consistency, it's almost like going to the gym. I've said before, working out and committing to it and doing it even if you don't want to do it. I mean, that's really how you get it done. I know that the other day I was sitting down to do the pages, and it was really tough to get myself to pull it together to do it. And after about, like, first 20 minutes into it, you just kind of lose yourself into the routine, and it becomes more enjoyable, and you forget that you didn't really feel like doing it, and now you're getting it done. And so those are the kinds of moments that you got to push yourself, I think, if you're struggling to stay on task, because it is a challenge. And just like I said, like working out, you just gotta keep with it, and that's how you get it done. And the reason why I talk about that so much is because I know that there was a time where it was difficult for me to do that, to like stay on it and get pages completed. And I remember early projects, my goal was just to get a few pages done, and I did, and it was like I accomplished that, and then I'd get burnt out on it, but I still wanted to complete a book, so I'd revisit, and sometimes I'd start over though, because a lot of it's a learning process. A lot of it is, you learn from your mistakes on it, and you try to improve, and you want to find a project that really does inspire you. And I think that was a little bit of my problem in the early parts when I was taking on projects, is they weren't really inspiring me. Like, I wasn't really into it. And when I first made White Cell Inoculation, I found that, like, I based it on the Metal Gear Solid video games that I really liked, and it just kind of charged me for the project. And I think I finally hit something that I found interesting. I liked what I was doing with it. I was doing some different things artistically that excited me, because the traditional kind of like stories that you often see, like the superhero stories, they just couldn't keep my attention. They just didn't give me the drive to finish. And I think if you're going to start a project and you want to see it through, you got to really find something that inspires you, and something that really kind of like, you know um, put some fuel under you, and you can get it done. All right, so getting back to the line work here and the art, you'll notice I kind of use a small brush. It's a thin brush. I think I use it. It's a 10. It's a 10 like tilted brush, and this is just to create all the definitive line work, all of the Added details, things like that will come later. I'll come in with solid blacks. I'll do a thicker brush for shadows. But because I'm going in with flats, like I use grayscale flats on this, I kind of rely a lot on the different tonnage that I'm going to be using when I color and render the flats. So in this book, I do a lot more line work. On a previous book series I did called Big Man Down, I did a lot of like the ink rendering. That was a black and white book too, but I wasn't using flats. I would just go in, and a lot of the white from the page was used, and I would use different gradations and um, textured brushes to create sort of values and shading that way. And so, since this is a different approach, I focus more on the actual line work to establish the art, and then come in with all of the color rendering or grayscale rendering later. And that, again, that'll be in the next video. So for here, I just really want to get down all of the line work. And another thing I'm going to do, once the line work is all complete, I come in, which is something I'm doing for this book, which is new, is I'll do like an outline, a thick brush outline, which a lot of artists do. Um, and that just kind of helps pop the images out and making it so that you're drawing attention to all the important parts in the scene. And so this is all part of the line work phase. When I'm making characters too, I always have like mental reminders of their, what their character looks like, and you have to always make sure you hit those marks. For instance, on Quinn here, he has these scratch scars basically over his left eye, and I don't go in and make sure that the scratches are the exact same from every shot, because really it's just kind of like a scarry mess. And so for him, I just want to make sure it's in the right area, and it's reminiscent at least, and it tries to stay somewhat consistent. But things like that are just what makes his character, the hair that he has, and his scarf. All these things. A nice tip too, which I've done for this project, which has helped me a lot. I have a corkboard above my desk, and I had printed out all my character concept art, and I just placed them all up there so that it's a quick reference to every character. And it's something simple. Maybe it's obvious, but I didn't really think to do that on the first books that I did. So I was constantly flipping back to older pages or my reference sheet that I had before. But now I got all the characters in the series up on the wall there, and it's awesome for just kind of quick referencing, um, and making sure that you stay consistent. And that's something that I think that a lot of quick artists um, have to keep in mind, and some struggle with, is the consistency of your characters, how they look in different angles and positions. And that's something I'm still working at. It's important, I think, for the reader to be able to easily distinguish characters and also kind of see them in a way that's recognizable. And so it's important to keep in mind too. I know animators, that's really crucial. People that are in animation, that's like the most important part, is making sure that there's a consistency in all the characters. Comics, you want to be consistent, absolutely. But when you're dealing with all these different styles and approaches, as long as you have the character is consistent, you can still show them in different ways. You can show them in different styles. And if you think of like cartoons and animation, you can't do that. You got to keep them stylistically the same. But there's times where I'll use different brushes or very texturized brushes, and give them a different style treatment, especially based on like maybe heavy shadows or a scene where it's in a different setting. And so all that's a lot of fun to show them in different lights, and so you can see them in different ways. 'Cause people look different too. If you're in the middle of the night and it's there's a spotlight hanging overhead, those shadows are going to make you just appear to be a little bit different than you would on a bright day. And so I try to keep that in mind when I'm creating the scenes and drawing my characters. I try to give the readers something interesting to look at And then also I try to do it in different ways so they can see the characters in different ways as well. Okay, so talking digitally, because I've had some people asking me questions about working in a digital medium. What do I use? How do you set things up? So I thought, why not talk about that a little bit? I use Photoshop. Using an older one. I don't use the suite. I use in Photoshop CS6, and I really enjoy using it. I haven't experimented with any of the other softwares. I know there's a lot out there. There's Clip Art or Clip Studio or something like that. There's one for manga, and they all seem to work great though, because I've seen the books and that people have made using those programs, and they look fantastic. And I know a lot of them also have tools for making comic books, which is even better. I wish there was some tools in Photoshop that help with like creating perspective, because there are so many other softwares that utilize kind of perspective tools, and that would be helpful. But I mean, it's Photoshop is what it is. It's not necessarily designed for making comics, so there's that. Setting up the pages though, I people have asked like what resolution, things like that. As long as you're using anything over 300, you should be fine. Early projects, I used to work in 300, but then I found in print and all that, I kind of wanted a little bit more detail, a little crisper looking pages. So I've bumped it up to about 450. I'm working on a small laptop, MacBook, so I can't push it too hard by really pumping up the resolution. But ultimately, as long as you're at 300, that's good, because that's good for print, and that's really what you want to do. If you're working on web, if you're making web details, you can go with a much lower resolution. So what else can I say about working digital that people are asking? Oh yeah, what do I work with? I got a Wacom tablet. It's an Intuos. I really like it. I don't have one of those the ones you can draw straight onto the screens. Those seem pretty cool. But I'm just really accustomed to using the pen and tablet. So I recommend, if you're looking at like going into the digital stuff, just look into the Wacom products. They have a bunch of different stuff. They got some smaller, more like affordable economic versions, and then they have really expensive stuff all the way to the top. Really great stuff. So yeah, when making comics, for me, I know that I've worked a lot out just by making the comics. So what I mean by that is like by sticking with the project and just kind of just working through all the weaknesses and problems. I try not to get hung up on perfectionism, and making everything just perfect. I try to just keep my head down and keep moving through it, and that seems to have been working out for me, because even though your early work isn't perfect or whatever, because I look back at my first series and I could see so many things wrong with it, but it was a learning process, and it was kind of like you have something to look back and show for it though, and it's a motivator to keep going, because I kind of was just spinning in circles for a while when I first started, and I didn't have anything to show for it, because I was just so concerned about making sure everything was just right, and I wasn't committing and getting anything done. And I think that if you just kind of get it done, even with its faults, and just have it finished, looking at a finished product is sort of gratifying in a sense, and despite the problems with it, because you can say, hey, look, I got this done. Where do we go next? What kind of improvements can I make going forward? And that's kind of been my approach at making these books. And it's I know that it's easy to say, hey, this isn't exactly how I want it to look. This isn't perfect. And it took me a while to kind of overcome that. And if I'm struggling, I'll give it my best effort. If I'm really struggling, I'll whip out some reference and move on. I can't linger anymore on the every little detail, because it's counterproductive. It's great to want to have everything look perfect, but it can also slow you down, because the truth is as you work, you're going to get better. The more you do something, the better you'll get, regardless. It's just the way things work. So I kind of keep that in mind going forward, that as long as I'm producing and still making work, my skill level increased, and it has increased, and it'll work for anyone doing it. And so, my advice would be if you're, trying to get the comics done, is just get them done and don't obsess so much about how perfect it is. There's that video going around the internet called "Finish Not Perfect," and that was a huge stepping stone for me on taking, you know, my steps toward getting comics done. And it was kind of like an epiphany I had where I forget the name of the guy that did it, Jake something I believe, but the way he worded it and the way he made this video about just get it done, and it's simple, but it's very true, and you just get it done, and the next time you go to do it, it'll be easier, and the next time it'll be easier. I've had people at conventions talk to me and ask me, um, how did you get the first one done? Was it hard? And it's, yeah, the first one was very hard. The second one was hard too because after the first one, it like took a lot out of me, and I took a long break. And the second one, halfway through, I was starting to kind of get a stride with it. And then every project after that, every book that I've done after that has seemed to get easier, but you don't want to get comfortable. So I still challenge myself with like this drawing here is I can tell it's challenging me here, but I still try to challenge yourself. But once you get over the hurdles of you know number one, finishing your first page, number two, getting a handful of pages done that you're satisfied with, and all the way up to getting your book lettered and printed. These are all like challenges that once you overcome them for the first, second time, they are so much less intimidating, so much easier to overcome, and then you present yourself with new challenges. And so, I keep going on and on about, getting it done and trying to just get that first book done. And this is for all those guys that haven't got anything done, the book done yet. Is I'm trying to encourage you just to get the first book done because I feel like it opens the gate to getting as many books as you want done. And that's how I feel now. I got a whiteboard with a list of projects that I want to get done. Just ideas, some of them fleshed out, some of them not not really that fleshed out yet. But it's a board where I look at and I know like that's my goal is just to keep making books. And this project here this is going to be book one of two books that will make up the sequel, the Right Cell Re-Evolution sequel. This is going to be book one called Smoke. The next one will be book two will be called Fire, and together they're going to tell the story. So that's my goal right now is to just produce these two books, and each one is going to be roughly about 80. This one's 84 pages complete, and the other one will be roughly the same size. Sometimes it can get overwhelming when you're looking at the project as a whole. So often I'll just look at it, especially if I'm struggling with it, look at it as just doing one page at a time, and then watching them add up and seeing that progress is how you can get it done. But you gotta stay disciplined. You gotta really know that it's important to you, and you gotta put the time in. There's no way to make a comic and get it complete unless you're taking it seriously and unless you are committing to getting the pages done regularly. Because I feel too like, when you're trying to make, I guess, like a name for yourself in the comics, in the indie world especially, there are a lot of great indie artists, indie creators that I admire and that inspire me. And usually the ones that inspire me the most are the ones that stay consistent. The ones that are constantly putting out content and you can see their progress. And those are the ones that inspire me because I know that it's a challenge to do it. And if they're doing it, I want to keep doing it. I think the consumer too, if you're trying to sell your books, that's what they look for. They look for consistency. And I try to release all my books every other month, so a new book every 2 months. And I've been able to stick with that, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback on that from people that are buying my books. They know that they can kind of count on the next one to come out every 2 months, and they like that. And I know the reason why I do that is because I know that if I'm buying comic books, especially from an indie guy, I want to know that I can count on them to continue making the comic books. So consistency and discipline in making comics, I feel, is crucial to like kind of planting your stake in the ground and really like getting recognized as a serious comic creator. So definitely keep that in mind when you are deciding to start a project. All right, guys, this is the final page all lined up. The next part of the video will be taking it into full rendering and inking effects. Thanks so much for watching. You can follow all my projects at facebook.com/mindcorecomics, and stay tuned for episode 3. It'll be coming soon. Thanks a lot.